The security footage from that Tuesday morning in July still makes me laugh every time I watch it. There's Patricia Donovan, president of the Maple Ridge HOA, jimmying my back door with a crowbar while muttering about her quote-unquote inspection authority. What happened next became the most watched video in our county's police department history. She didn't know about my two German shepherds, Max and Duke, who were sleeping in the living room. The moment that door creaked open, 110 pounds of protective canine instinct came barreling toward her. They didn't attack her, but they certainly made their displeasure known, herding her down my gravel driveway like she was a wayward sheep while she screamed bloody murder and clutched her clipboard like it was a shield. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This whole mess started 3 weeks earlier when I inherited my grandfather's cabin in Maple Ridge, a small vacation community about 2 hours north of Portland. The place came with two things I hadn't expected: membership in the local HOA and the immediate attention of Patricia Donovan. Patricia was 57 years old, drove a pristine white Lexus with a personalized license plate that read HOA Boss, and had apparently been running the Maple Ridge HOA like her personal kingdom for the past 8 years. The first time I met her, she showed up at my door with a measuring tape and a sour expression, informing me that my mailbox was 3 inches too tall, according to Regulation 7.44 of the Community Guidelines. I tried to be polite at first. I really did. I explained that I was still settling in, that I worked remotely as a software developer and mainly kept to myself, and that I'd look into the mailbox situation when I had time. Patricia's response was to hand me a stack of papers thick enough to use as a doorstop. She said, with a condescending tone, that these were the complete HOA regulations and that I had 72 hours to review them and sign an acknowledgement form. She added that failure to comply would result in daily fines starting at $50. I thanked her, closed the door, and promptly used the papers to start a fire in my wood stove that evening. The next morning, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. Apparently, the smoke from my chimney had been excessive and potentially hazardous to community air quality. This was followed by another notice about my truck being parked at a 15-degree angle instead of perfectly parallel to the driveway lines. Then came a third notice about the pile of firewood stacked against the side of my cabin, which Patricia claimed was a fire hazard and an eyesore that violated Aesthetic Guideline 12.6. Each violation came with a $25 fine. I ignored them all. Patricia escalated quickly after that. She started telling neighbors that she suspected I was running some kind of illegal business from my cabin. She claimed she could smell chemicals and hear strange noises at all hours. Mrs. Peterson from 2 houses down actually came by to warn me, whispering that Patricia was trying to organize a community meeting specifically to discuss the problem tenant at Lot 47. That would be me. Mrs. Peterson seemed embarrassed by the whole thing and admitted that most people thought Patricia had lost her mind, but nobody wanted to challenge her because she had a reputation for making life miserable for anyone who crossed her. The harassment continued for another week. Patricia would park her Lexus at the end of my driveway and just sit there, taking photos of my property with her phone. She left more violation notices for everything from the color of my curtains, which were apparently too dark and uninviting, to the fact that I didn't have seasonal decorations on my porch. It was July, for crying out loud. She even complained to the county that my dogs were unlicensed, which resulted in an animal control visit. Of course, Max and Duke were fully licensed and up to date on all their shots, so that went nowhere. But it was the principle of the thing that really started to irritate me. I installed security cameras the following weekend, 4 of them with motion sensors and cloud storage. Patricia didn't like that one bit. She showed up at my door the very next day, practically vibrating with indignation. She announced in her most authoritative voice that security cameras required HOA approval and that I needed to submit Form 47B along with a $200 processing fee. I told her calmly that I'd reviewed the actual legal HOA documents filed with the county, not her made-up addendums, and that security cameras were perfectly allowable. Her face turned an interesting shade of purple before she spun on her heel and marched back to her car. That's when things got genuinely concerning. Patricia started spreading rumors that I was dangerous. She told anyone who would listen that she'd seen me with weapons, that I had a criminal record, and that she was worried for the safety of the community. She even called the police for a welfare check, claiming she hadn't seen me in days and was concerned I might have overdosed on drugs. The officer who showed up was apologetic and mentioned that they'd been getting a lot of calls from Patricia lately about various neighbors. He suggested I might want to document everything just in case. The morning of the incident, I had to drive into town for a client meeting. I left around 8 a.m., expecting to be gone for maybe 3 hours. Max and Duke were inside as usual, lounging on their beds in the living room. I always left them inside when I was gone because they had a doggy door to the fenced backyard if they needed to go out. What I didn't expect was for Patricia to be watching my house, waiting for me to leave. The security footage later showed her car pulling up just 5 minutes after I'd driven away. She didn't even try to be subtle about it. The cameras captured her walking straight up my driveway with a crowbar in one hand and her clipboard in the other. She tried the front door first, then walked around to the back. The audio picked up her muttering something about having the authority to inspect for safety violations and how I had brought this on myself. It took her about 3 minutes to pry open the back door, and she actually smiled when it finally gave way. That smile lasted approximately 2 seconds. Max and Duke are gentle giants most of the time, but they take their job as protectors of the house very seriously. The moment Patricia stepped inside, they came charging out of the living room, barking loud enough to wake the dead. Patricia screamed, dropped her clipboard, and ran faster than I would have thought possible for someone in platform heels. The dogs followed her out the door and down the driveway, not attacking, but definitely herding her away from the property. Duke kept grabbing at her clipboard while Max circled around her, barking continuously. Patricia made it to the road, where she practically threw herself into the first car that stopped, which happened to be driven by Tom Morrison from Lot 15. According to Tom's later testimony, Patricia was hysterical, claiming she'd been attacked by vicious dogs while conducting official HOA business. Tom, bless his heart, drove her straight to the police station, where she demanded that my dogs be put down immediately and that I be arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. The dogs, apparently, were the weapons in this scenario. The police took her statement and then sent 2 officers out to my property. By this time, I was already racing home, having received an alert from my security system about the break-in. I arrived just as the officers were examining the damaged back door. Max and Duke were calmly sunbathing in the front yard, looking about as threatening as a pair of teddy bears. I immediately offered to show the officers the security footage, which they watched with increasingly incredulous expressions. The senior officer, Deputy Harrison, actually had to pause the video at one point because he was trying not to laugh. He said, in a professional but clearly amused tone, that this was probably the clearest case of breaking and entering he'd seen in his 15-year career. When we got to the part where Patricia was running down the driveway with the dogs following her, his partner had to step outside because he was laughing so hard. Deputy Harrison asked if I wanted to press charges, and I said absolutely yes. They arrested Patricia that afternoon. The look on her face when they showed up at her house with handcuffs was priceless. She kept insisting she had HOA authority to inspect properties, to which Deputy Harrison replied that HOA rules don't supersede state law and that breaking and entering is a felony. She demanded to call her lawyer, who apparently told her to stop talking immediately. The whole neighborhood came out to watch as they put her in the back of the squad car. The story spread through Maple Ridge like wildfire. Someone, I never found out who, posted the arrest video on the community Facebook page with the caption, HOA president arrested for breaking into neighbor's house. Within hours, it had over 300 comments, most from people sharing their own horror stories about Patricia's reign of terror. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she'd been harassing. There were stories about fabricated violations, mysterious fines, and intimidation tactics going back years. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that Friday. Patricia couldn't attend, obviously, since she was out on bail with a restraining order that prevented her from coming within 500 feet of my property. The meeting was standing room only. People who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years showed up. The treasurer, a quiet accountant named Janet, finally had the courage to present some interesting findings about the HOA finances. It turned out Patricia had been approving payments to herself for various administrative expenses that no one could account for. The vote to remove Patricia from the HOA board was unanimous. Even her usual supporters, a small group of residents who enjoyed the power trips as much as she did, voted against her when they saw the actual evidence of embezzlement. Janet estimated that Patricia had taken close to $30,000 over the past 5 years in fraudulent reimbursements, everything from charging the HOA for her personal cell phone bill to claiming expenses for HOA conferences that she never attended. Meanwhile, the criminal case was moving forward. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she genuinely believed she had the right to enter my property, but the prosecutor wasn't buying it. The security footage was damning, especially the audio of her saying she knew I wasn't home and that she was going to find something to find me for if it killed her. The prosecutor also pointed out that Patricia had brought a crowbar, which showed premeditation. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment bad decision. It was planned criminal activity. Patricia tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I refused to agree to anything that didn't include jail time. My lawyer said I was being harsh, but I disagreed. This woman had terrorized an entire neighborhood for years, stolen thousands of dollars, and broke into my home. If there weren't consequences, she'd just do it again somewhere else. The prosecutor agreed with me and pushed forward with the full charges. The trial was relatively short. Patricia's lawyer tried to paint her as a dedicated community servant who had simply been overzealous in her duties. The prosecution presented the security footage, the financial records showing embezzlement, and testimony from 14 different neighbors about Patricia's pattern of harassment and intimidation. Mrs. Peterson actually cried on the stand while describing how Patricia had made her life miserable for 3 years over a garden gnome that was supposedly the wrong shade of red. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Patricia was found guilty of breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and embezzlement. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Maureen Campbell, seemed personally offended by Patricia's abuse of her HOA position. During sentencing, she said that people like Patricia were the reason HOAs had such terrible reputations, and that using a position of minor authority to bully and steal from neighbors was particularly reprehensible. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay $45,000 in restitution to the HOA. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. When the judge read the sentence, Patricia's jaw dropped open, and she started sobbing uncontrollably, wailing that this wasn't fair and that she had only been trying to maintain property values.